Good afternoon. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have decided to join today's talk, and a special welcome to our guest speaker, Endre Farkas from Montreal. His visit was originally scheduled to take place at this time last year, but had to be cancelled due to the global pandemic. The pandemic is still not over, unfortunately, so Endre is with us in this virtual meeting room now. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce him to you before I give him the floor. Endre Farkas was born in Hungary. He is a child of Holocaust survivors. His family escaped during the 1956 Hungarian Revolution and settled in Montreal and has lived there ever since. He has published 2 novels, 11 books of poetry, and 2 plays. His work has been translated into French, Spanish, Italian, and Slovenian. He has read and performed widely in Canada, the United States, Latin America, and Europe, and has created performance pieces that have toured across Canada and outside the country. He has also translated the poetry of the Hungarian Károly Bari. His book, How To, was nominated for the A.M. Klein Prize for Poetry in 1988. He is the 2-time winner of the CBC Radio Poetry Face-Off competition. His collaborative book and video poem, Blood is Blood, was the winner of Zebra's International Poetry Film Festival in Berlin in 2012. His 2 novels, Never Again and Home Game, were published by Signature Editions in 2016 and 2019, respectively. Home Game was shortlisted for the Paragraph Hugh MacLennan Prize for Fiction, and I'm sure we will hear more about these books later in his talk. The talk will be followed by a question and answer session when you can address your questions directly to our guest. But if you have questions during the talk, please use the chat box to write your questions there. And it is over to you, Endre.
Thank you. Jó reggelt nekem, jó délután nektek. Thank you for the invitation and that introduction. And I'm glad to be back in Budapest virtually, if nothing else, Let me start with a quote and something I heard on the radio just recently. The quote, "Losing one's homeland obliges one to find one's homeland." I wish I could remember who said this, but I remember reading it, noting it, and forgetting to take down the source, so I'm a terrible academic that way. The other thing is, a few days ago, I was listening to a person on the CBC radio here in Canada. She was a Syrian refugee who fled the war 10 years ago. She was asked if she was interested in going back home when the war ends. Without hesitation, in immigrant English, she answered that she was home. She was then asked what did being home mean to her. She, with the same sureness, answered, "Home is the feeling of safeness." I've been here for 66 years, and I still can't say it with the same sureness. I do feel safe, I do feel comfortable, and I do feel loved, but there's something else that's I've been trying to resolve for most of my literary life. Could we have slide number 1, please? What I'm trying to resolve is, where is home? This has been one of my major literary quests from my first book of poetry, Serbus, published in 1974, to my most recent novel, Home Game, published in 2019. You might notice also that in Serbus, my name is Endre Farkas, and in Home Game, it's Endre Farkas. I will talk a little bit about that later when it comes to talking about some of the complexity of living here. Okay, what I would like to do is start with Serbus, published in 74, and sort of give you a sense that right from the start, I didn't know it then, and I only took it in a while, but to get the sense that I've been dealing with the same issue for a long time. So I will read the first poem in the book. It's called Said, S-A-I-D. You go back, knowing you can't. It's written sad and believed. You stand on a corner, you sad next to you, in knee pants, with all the adventures ahead. Where else can they be? All the scrapes to be cried over, always wanting to be growing up, but there's time, and that's been sad too. And now its sound is different, enclosing wrist and brain. You go back, touching corners, naming them as they should have been. Sad. Okay, let me introduce you a little bit the way that Maria introduced and a little bit differently. That you might get a sense of the complexity of being who I am and the main character in my novel. I am a Hungarian-born Jew, exiled, allophone, living mostly in English with a Lebanese Greek Orthodox Canadian partner in an officially French province in an officially bilingual Canada, taken, stolen from Indigenous First Nation people. So there's the beginning of the complexity. Second, next, please. I attended Barrambing, a Protestant high school that was 90% Jewish immigrant. The other 10% were second or third generation Jewish immigrants. Next. Barrambing's famous alumni were Canadian poets A.M. Klein, Irving Layton, and novelist Mordecai Richler. Next slide, please. It was also well known for its Christmas choir. Every Christmas, we had to sing Christmas songs. Imagine an auditorium full of Jewish immigrant parents listening to their children sing Christmas songs, praising Jesus Christ as the King of Israel. However, the ultimate irony was not that parents loudly and proudly applaud, but often Barrambing's Jewish choir won the best citywide Christmas choir of the year. So that is the kind of melange that I stepped into. I also want to tell you about the circumstances of how I got here in my new home. In 1956, I was 7 years old, happily, innocently, living in Hajdúnánas, Hungary, playing soccer with my cousins, dreaming of becoming the next Kocsis. My best friend was Béka, a gypsy Roma boy whose mother had been my wet nurse. I was in grade 1, learning my ABC and memorizing József Attila's Aludjál jó kis Balázs. My parents, as Maria said, were Holocaust survivors who had returned to discover that most of their family, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, had been murdered for being Jewish. They came back after the war to start a new life in a town where most of the neighbors had passively watched them being taken away to ghettos and concentration camps. In 1956, as you well know, an uprising broke out in Hungary. In most of the cities, the uprising had noble intention. Anti-Semitism showed its ugly face again. I got kicked out of school for being Jewish, and that night, people who were nice to us during the day became a mob looking for Jews to beat up. I remember my mother going to market with a knife in her pocket. I remember my parents telling me that the rabbi had been beaten up and stuffed into a chicken coop. I remember the blacksmiths who were next door to us sitting in our front door at night with hammers to prevent the mob from entering our home. I remember my parents deciding to leave. I remember being on the train to the border, being stopped by AVO, the secret police, and ordered off the train. I remember my father, in the confusion, pretending to be an AVO officer and pushing my mother and me into the train bathroom and standing guard until we got to the border town. I remember crossing no man's land into Austria in the middle of the night. My first novel, Never Again, is based on these experiences, It is from a 7-year-old Tommy Wolfstein's perspective. It is about his understanding, confusion, and ignorance of leaving his birthland. It is about his loss of innocence and home. Now, you don't have to read Never Again to understand what my second novel, Home Game, is about, but it helps, and my publisher would love you for it. Anyway, okay, before I go on to talking about the second novel, I want to give you a brief history of Canada, of my new home. Next slide, please. The first thing to know about Canada is that it was not a land that was lost and then found or discovered by European explorer Giovanni Cabato in 1497. Next slide, please. It was always there, inhabited by First Nations for thousands of years. It was and is a land occupied by a number of nations. They're not called tribes, they call themselves nations. Huron, Iroquois, Blood, Blackfoot, Haida, all across the country, and many others spread across a vast landmass. Next slide, please. They had complex cultures and arts. They had sophisticated technology. Next slide, please. In transportation, in canoes, snowshoes, in architecture, teepees, longhouses, and igloos. In survival skills, medicine and hunting. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the Inuit up north. You can see how cold it gets. My partner, who's been up there and taught, said that it sometimes can get up to minus 55 degrees Celsius. But those igloo houses are incredibly warm. And here's a picture of their traditional meals, which is raw meat, caribou, whale, seal, and they eat it around sitting on the floor and share. That's one of their important elements. Anyway, okay, next, please. I want to read you a poem from my book, In the Worshipful Company of Skinners, which is a book about an imagined young man who comes to this land as a apprentice to the fur company. And the poems trace his evolution, his trajectory across the country, and as he gets older. And the poem that I want to read, and in a way, this poem for me, I often refer to as my Canadian poem, book of poems, because it's sort of my looking into my new country's history. The poem I want to read to you is called The Gift from the Great Mystery. And it's a poem about hunting. And the white man used to go in there, hunt buffalo. They kill the buffalo, skin it, and leave the rest to rot. That was their way, because the skin was what was important, what was profitable. For the native, it was the entire animal. They prayed to it before they went to hunt, and they looked at it in a way as their holy supermarket. So here it is, the gift from the great mystery. The great mystery is what they refer to as their spirit or God. For the savages, the hunt is a different business. From its hide, they make teepees, robes, saddles, shields, shirts, gloves, moccasins, ropes, leggings, quivers, parfleche sacks. That's what they keep the arrows in. From its sinew, its muscles, bowstrings, twine, thread. From its bones, shovels, arrows, axe heads, scrapers, traps, runners for sleds. From its throat, heart sacks and paunch, pouches. From its brain, liver and fat, tanning grease. From the rough skin of its tongue, hairbrushes. From its horns, spoons, cups, powder horns, arrowheads. From its marrow, soup. From its hooves, rattles and glue. From its tail, scabbards for war clubs, medicine rattles. From its excrement, fuel, and from its skull, the sacred totem for the next hunt. So that's sort of a poem that sums up the difference between the whites and the natives on a larger scale as well. Okay, next slide, please. This is what Canada looks like now. As you can see, it's made up of provinces, territories, and a few cities spread along the 49th parallel. Now, to introduce you to Canada that way, I want to read you another poem that I wrote called O Canada. It's a poem that is a bit of a satire, and it is based on the Canadian national anthem, which most Canadians don't know. And it's each line of each section begins with a line from the anthem. The only thing I changed was the first line, which in the anthem goes, "Our home and native land." And I changed it to "Our home and not our native land." Okay? Oh, Canada, our home and not our native's land. Let us rise and be worthy of our forefathers, whose noble courage their hearts did fire, whose mercantile masters their pockets inspire, who left far behind their native shores and braved the perils of the stormy seas in search of tea, silk, and spicy Asians to seek the northwest route to China, but settled for Lachine. Let us rise and be worthy of our forefathers, whose boats brought guns, rats, and diseases to this quelques arpents de neige, to this land that God gave to Cain, who first bravely met this pagan savage, and for God, king, and country, toked peace pipes, planted crosses, lied, signed, and broke all treaties to steal this land for you and me. For again, we need to stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, true patriot love in all thy sons command. Let us rise and be worthy of our French forefathers, who are now famous streets, parks, and bridges, who brought over those fils de roi to fill the cribs with future first-round hockey picks, and those coureurs de bois whose great skills, snowshoeing, paddling, portaging, smoking, drinking, singing, spitting, and making babies, were surpassed only by their passion for chasing beaver. Let us rise and be worthy of our English forefathers, who were famous streets and parks and bridges, whose accounting Scots kept the books and cash in immaculate pillared banks, whose starved out Irish filled the factories, taverns, churches, and obediently, annually made a fresh batch of babies. For again, we need to stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, with glowing hearts we see thee rise. Let us rise and be worthy of our anthem that we do not know, of our history that we do not know, of our geography that we do not know, of our languages that we do not know, of our arts that we do not know, of our culture that we do not know, of our immigrants that we do not want. Let us rise and be worthy of our glorious Queen, who graces our stamps and cash, of our Governor General, who licks and spends our Queen, of our Bloc Québécois, who case pops our queens, of our Liberals, who pork barrel our Queen, of our NDPs, who would socialize our Queen, of our Conservatives, who are afraid of our queens. For again, we need to stand on guard for thee. O Canada, from far and wide, let us rise and be worthy of our too few rich, of our too few powerful, who would be our leaders, whose ships fly foreign flags, whose factories are erected on foreign shores, whose profits are in foreign untaxed shelters, whose exploited foreign workers dream of coming to this foreign shores to be free and do the same. For again, we need to stand on guard for thee. So I'm going to stop there because it goes on for quite a bit. And as you can see, it's critical of some of the things that are part of the current idea of an understanding of Canada. So it is to this place that I've come and I'm a part of. Okay, so could you please go to, this is now moving to a bit of my experience in my new land. Next slide, please. We arrived in the middle of winter. This is a Canadian winter. It looked and felt like the North Pole. Next slide, please. Gilles Vigneault, a famous Canadian, Quebec poet, singer and poet. In one of his poems, he says, "Mon pays, my country, is not a country, it's winter." I lived in an island that A.M. Klein described in his poem of Montreal. So here's a common scene, winter scene here. We are a hardy bunch. If we have to get beer, we will go out in the snow like the old coureurs de bois and get the best beer we can. Anyway, next. Now, this is a poem from a segment of a poem from A.M. Klein's called Montreal. And on the left, I put all the languages that are spoken here. And there are more, but I didn't have room for it, to give you a sense. And the poem of A.M. Klein's begins, "Grand port of navigations, multiple, the lexicons of uncargoed at your quays." By lexicons, he's referring to the various languages that people bring with them to this new country. Next, please. "Sonant, though strange to me, but chiefest I, auditor of your music, cherish." And here, this is, just to give you an example, Chinatown, Jewish writing to advertise apartments to let, Arab clubs, Hungarian. This is one of the nice Hungarian clubs in Montreal, a night restaurant, Greek newspapers. So it's a mélange. Okay, next, please. Joined double melodied vocabulaire were English vocab and Role Cossack, mollified by the parle of French, by lingufact your air. That's A.M. Klein trying to write in French and English as a way of bridging gaps. I call that poem of his a very successful failure, because poetry has a problem when it tries to write in two languages, but his intentions were good. Okay, now, okay, that's sort of a brief little background history. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, my first novel, excuse me, I have water. As I mentioned, my first novel, Never Again, dealt with the experiences and adventures of a 7-year-old Tommy Wolfstein and his parents during the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. And notice that the covers are similar in the sense that they have the Hungarian flag colors, and one has Never Again. It's a revolutionary flag with a hole, and this one is the maple leaf. And I hope there'll be one other book for this, which the group title I want to give it is the Cerbus Trilogy. But I'm not sure if that third book, when it will be available, when I will finish it. Okay. So Home Game picks up Tommy's story, Tommy Wolfstein's story. It is set in Montreal and Hungary in 1967. The title of the novel refers to these places, Montreal, Canada, and Hungary. But it's also a sports term. I don't know if you have this in Hungary, a home team, Otthoni Csapat. And that's the team that is the visitors go to play against. Home game means that the home team is at home to receiving visitors. They have the advantage of familiarity of their field and the support of their fans. The irony of the title for Tommy is that he is there. He's gone back to visit to play soccer, but he isn't from there. He's from there, but he's a visitor. He is welcomed, but not welcome. Tommy is 19, is like your age, is in university, and is captain of his soccer team that had just won the Canadian Soccer University Championship. In 1967, when the story takes place, it is also Canada's 100th birthday. As a way of celebrating Canada's coming of age, Montreal was awarded the World's Fair. In a way, that symbolizes Tommy's coming of age as well. The world is coming to celebrate Canada's birthday. Hungary did not come, but in my novel, it has invited Tommy's team to come to Hungary to play a couple of friendly exhibition games against Hungary's university champion. So the story is about Tommy's return to his birthland, the place that he and his family were forced to flee. This return brings up memories of his experiences that he has to deal with. It is also about his coming of age sexually and the conflict with his parents and culture because his girlfriend is not Jewish. It is part of the intercultural conflict that is part of the Canadian experience for first generation youth and their parents. The novel starts in medias res. I don't know if you've learned that term yet, but if medias res is a literary term, that means a story starts in the middle and then it moves back or forth, as a device. It's the novel Home Game starts in medias res. Tommy has been arrested. I'm not going to tell you why, but this is the opening passage, and it pretty well has all the elements that are developed in the rest of the novel. So I'm going to read you the first piece. Tommy was caressing the brownish stain fading into his palm when the officer prodded him. He stood. "Tamash, come in," the chief said. The officer prodded him again. A man in a dark suit was seated at Chief Barna's large wooden desk. 3 portraits on the wall behind him. Tommy recognized Lenin and Marx, but not the third. He hadn't noticed the pictures the last time he was here. A thick black curtain covered the window. "Where's Brushkoy?" Tommy asked, looking at a pair of glasses on the floor. "Who?" the chief asked. He turned to see what Tommy was looking at. "Frog. Why did you call him that other name?" Because that's his name. It means frog in his language, in the Roma language. "That's no concern of yours. I asked the questions," the man in the dark suit snapped. Tommy faced him. He didn't look familiar. He wasn't the one who had been following him. Was he an Avo pig? That's what Deje Papa called the secret police. The ones, he said, who came in the middle of the night and took you away never to return. The ones who had stopped the train and ordered them off. Was he one of those that Deje Papa had punched in the face? "Where did you leave the dagger?" the man in the dark suit asked Tommy. The question came from a million miles away in a language he didn't fully understand. "I'm sorry," he appealed to Chief Barna for help. "I don't understand what a dagger is." "It's a small sword." "Oh, the blacksmiths made one for me and one for Gubby. We sometimes hid them in our pant legs because our parents didn't allow us to have dangerous toys." "That's not what I asked." The man slapped the desk. Tommy was startled. He thought for a moment. "Oh, in the nylon," he said. "Don't joke with me," the man snarled. "That's what we call the People's Diner," Chief Barna said quietly. "What I want to know from you is, when you decide to betray your motherland, where did you hide the dagger?" Tommy wasn't used to anybody being so aggressive towards him. What a strange question. He didn't understand. He turned to Chief Barna again. "When you and your parents left, did you hide your sword?" "Oh, are you stupid?" the man shouted. Tommy concentrated, trying hard to remember. "In the well," he said finally. "It's not fair that they got caught. I missed him." "Who got caught?" the man asked. Tommy sniffled. "Don't disgrace your father," Chief Barna spoke firmly. "Be a man." He took a deep breath. "Gabi, Deje Papa, and Emma, Mama. I'm not interested in your family's traitorous behavior then," the man in the dark suit said. "I'm interested in your criminal action tonight. I want to know how it started." Tommy wasn't sure. It happened so fast. It happened a long time ago. Maybe it began when Selish, this bully, whacked the cone off the rock candy from his hand, or maybe when Mrs. Gombash kicked him out of class, or when they tried to escape, or maybe it began with a beautiful goal. Okay, now that opening stanza I know is confusing. It's meant to be, because Tommy is back in Hungary and he's been arrested, as I said, and he's being questioned. And as he's being questioned, he doesn't fully understand because his Hungarian is spotty. And this man in a black coat, who he's seen men in black coats following him in 1956, was not unusual, was interrogating him for something that happened that Tommy was a part of. And Tommy, in the process of trying to answer the question and understand the question, is also remembering back to 56, where he had these little swords that the blacksmiths made for them. And it's an integral part of both novels. So if you're confused, that's good. It's a good beginning. And now I'll try to explain a bit more, and then maybe as I read later on, things will become clearer. Now, a little bit about the Canadian immigrant experience. It begins with the realization that in this country is a country of immigrants. It's part of its identity dilemma. Canada, you can imagine most countries and their language by what they are called. England is full of English who speak English. The same is true of France, Spain, Hungary. But Canada, what are Canadians, and do they speak Canadian, eh? Most of us don't even know where the name Canada comes from. I did a bit of research, and I found that likely comes from the Huron Iroquois word Kanata, meaning village or settlement. And so Cartier took this term that the natives told him that he's in Kanata, thinking that the whole country was called Canada. Okay, so that's the mystery of this country's name, and its language begins. Its language problems will begin. Okay, next slide, please. This is a map of Montreal. It's a ethnic map, and it tells you, this is a more recent one, but the colors show you the different cultures or different languages, different ethnic groups that live in different parts of the city. Okay, there were many cultures living here, but they were living here together but apart. In Montreal, we had sections of Little Italy, Chinatown, Little Hungary, Little Spain. So this is the areas, as immigrants tend to do when they come to a new country or place like Canada, that they tend to gather in areas where they find things similar. They speak the same language. They set up shops that are their taste. And they also, in Montreal, they organized soccer teams. So in Montreal, there was a soccer league that had Spania, Germania, Hungaria, Ukrainia, Italia, all these ethnic communities sponsored teams that played in a league. And in many ways, it was like having a part of the old world. And it was also a way to fight old battles. You should see, sometimes the soccer game was secondary to the violent action on the field. Anyway, in my novel, the Sir George Knights, which is the name of the Tommy's University soccer team, wasn't ethnic. It was intercultural. The players on the university team were from all over the world, but on the same team. This is the difference between that and the teams from the different ghettos. In a sense, they were the beginning of the future, while the ethnic teams were the past. Okay, I'm going to read us an excerpt from the novel that is that explains this difference. And the university team is at a nightclub called the El Gitano, which is a Spanish nightclub celebrating their victory of championship. And Tommy Tommy stands up to make a toast to the team. A toast means congratulations to their team. Tommy grinned at his teammates, the Sir George Knights, who called themselves the Sir Internationals. They were immigrants from all over the world whose parents had left their homeland for their own reasons. Olaf Knudsen, Roberto Gonzalez, Archie Belafonte, Stanislas Wojcik, Luigi Russo, Ivan Sokolov, Kostas Fotopoulos, Agostino Valdez, Tito Popovich, Derek Sullivan, and he, Tamás Wolfstein. He recited these foreign names to himself with the same pride he used to roll call the mighty Magyars. He almost couldn't believe that this goulash of guys had ended up, through accident, luck, skill, and chemistry, Canadian university champions. The only true Canadian whose families had been here forever, having come at the turn of the century, were Eric and Peter, the substitutes, Ben, the team manager, and Coach Huss. But on this soccer team, they were the foreigners. Coach Huss knew his soccer more as a gym teacher from the outside, unlike Tommy and the other Knights who knew it from the inside. We're from soccer-crazy countries. We got it with our mother's milk, Speedy once told Coach Hussle. I don't have much to add to what Speedy and Schmutz and Coach Huss said, Tommy said, but I can say that it is fun to be a part of a team that needs translators at team meetings. I'm proud to be part of the Sir Internationals, to the Knights. So that is a way of introducing the intercultural aspect that Tom is becoming a part of, Tommy, but not the parents who are more ghettoized. All the other parents of these other team players are still in their ghettos. Okay. I also, next slide, please. Yeah, here is The Two Solitudes is a novel, but it's also a term that is used in Canada to differentiate or explain, try to explain the two different main cultures in Quebec, especially the French and the English. And the French and the English have a very complicated and often violent and dramatic relationship. And your teachers will probably talk to you a bit about that. But there's also a third solitude that I want to introduce, and I deal with it in this novel. And that's the immigrant solitude. And that's best exemplified in The Apprenticeship of Duty Kravitz by Mordecai Richler, one of the well-known Canadian writers. So I also deal with this cultural problem of the French, English, and third solitude. And what I want to do is read you a segment that is about, gosh, I lost the page. No, what page? Page 25, yes, sorry. Yeah, okay. Now, in this section, Tommy is at home and his parent, well, maybe I should just read it and then I'll talk about it after. It may be simpler. Answer the phone, Tommy's mother yelled from the kitchen. Tommy was the telephone guard. He had been ever since they got their first phone when he was 9, because he understood enough English and spoke it well enough and almost without an accent. He was the first line of defense against the new world, as well as a bridge to it. And when it was a French caller, he could recognize that and say no merci and hang up. Because he was an immigrant and in the English Protestant school system, he had been exempted from learning French. And in high school, Monsieur Charles, his French teacher from France, repeated daily to his mainly immigrant-filled class, si vous n'êtes pas capable de parler comme il faut, gardez vos bouches fermées. So he and other immigrant kids kept their ears and mouths shut. The French he did know he learned on the street. It was nothing like Monsieur Charles. In this class, on the street, he learned that whatever you said, you put tabarnak, hostie, ciboire, or calvaire after it. Some even used them at the start of sentences. He knew that they were curse words and they had something to do with the church, but because he wasn't Catholic, he didn't understand or feel their impact. English cursing was simpler, more universal, and made more sense. It seemed to have only one curse word, which was used in all sorts of ways. Fuck, fucker, fucking, fuck you, what the fuck, and the one that usually led to fights, motherfucker. Even the French kids used it along with their French curse words. The Hungarian curses he heard from his father, usually aimed in jest at his cronies, and from his aunt, aimed in all seriousness at merchants she felt were trying to cheat her, were a lot more varied and colorful. They usually involved animal genital parts and genealogy. So that is one way when you, I don't know how many of you have been to other places to try to learn another language, but one of the first things you learn are the curse words, and that's one way of learning it. And here, it's interesting that the cursing, the Quebecois, the French Canadian, when they curse against the church. They use words that are against the church. Like hostie is the host. Ciboire is the glass you drink from. The English curse sexual parts, use sexual parts. And in a way, it reflects their cultural problems that they've had in Quebec. One, the French had a lot of problems with the church. The English speakers with their prude, Protestant, anti-sensual sexuality. So they take it out on the way they curse. The Hungarians, you know better than I do, so I leave that to you. But I want to read you another poem that 43. No, it's in the other book. Excuse me. Too many books. Okay. This is a poem about my mother learning English. And she, the poem is called You Know. And you know that the word know can be spelled two ways, K-N-O-W, which means be aware, and know meaning know, nem. So this is the poem about my mother learning the difference between them. You know. You know, every immigrant is a story. You know, the stranger in a strange land. You know, so much depends on knowing what you don't. Leaving her hostile homeland, crossing no man's land, and seasickness distances, she arrives. Free and desperate to say something, she is mute on the back balcony of a new country, a greener facing a new neighbor, who knows that she doesn't know the language. So, out of kindness, she speaks louder. My mother watches her mouth move. Rapid, mysterious sounds explode from her face. Almost, sometimes, she can make out shadows of words. You know, punctuates the neighbor's babble. No is a word an immigrant learns quickly, even before the curses. Listening to her neighbor's constant gets to her. My mother shouts back, I know, I know, I know, until it sounds like the hurling of pots and pans. You know, she's nothing if not determined, a survivor of the grammarian's extermination. So night after night, after sweatshop hours, my mother sits in immigrant classes with other awkward mouths, twisting their lips to master the new words, new worlds that would make her feel at home. Hello, how are you? Fine, thank you. And you? I am fine, thank you. She gags on the chalk placed under the tongue to get those the sounds, the, and think and thank you, to slip out smoothly as her breath. Her twisted tongue works hard and cries and curses. She learns to conjugate. She watches the future become the past too fast. She curses the language of this place, but curses more the language of the old country, a language of beautiful poetry and pure hate. Often late at night, in the quiet light, in the white light of memory, she sits in her dressing gown and reads. She takes pride in her comprehension and in her simple phrases that to her seem seamless, and the clothes she's sewn for over 30 years. Though she will never fully chart this language, she can say almost perfectly, this language is my land now, you know? Okay, now can you take off the slides? We're finished with the slides. Thank you. Okay. 80, page 80. So part of the difficulty on being an immigrant is language, obviously. And it's especially difficult for someone who only speaks Hungarian. Hungarian is wonderful when you're in Hungary, but it's totally useless when you're anywhere else in the world. So that was the difficulty that I faced, Tommy faced when he was a kid, although the child often learns a language much more quickly. And as I said in one of the texts, that he becomes the bridge. In a sense, he becomes the parent who can tell the parents, the child, what's what, and translate and interpret and be a bridge between the language and the cultures. Okay. Now, part of the cultural and intercultural problem for first generations is when the children move outside of their parents' influence. And that happens when they go to school and meet other kids from other cultures. And this creates conflict for the parents and the child. And so I'm going to read a section that reflects that. Tommy has a girlfriend, but it's a secret. He doesn't want to tell his parents because she's not Jewish. And that's a big thing for parents who survived the Holocaust, to see their children get involved with non-Jewish girls or women. So this is after a telephone call. Again, telephones play a role here. And the mother starts interrogating Tommy. And she's a good Jewish mother who wants to know everything, right? Everything you say, everything you do. So, what did she want? His mother asked. As usual, she was cooking something. The only time his mother was at rest was when she was reading. She wanted to know how I was. For that, you had to go to another room, she said. That was nice of her, his father said. Yes, she's nice. Is she your girlfriend? His mother didn't waste time. No, she's Speedy's sister. Speedy is Tommy's teammate. Speedy's sister. We're just friends. Boys and girls can't be just friends. Sure they can, he countered, but was pretty sure his mother was right. He didn't like her being so nosy. And she's not Jewish. Why does it matter if she's Jewish or not? We're just friends. I never even asked her out. Do you have a girlfriend? We haven't seen anyone. No, I'm too busy with work and soccer. He didn't want to talk to his parents about girls, especially his mother. Girls today are terrible. Their clothes are terrible. Their skirts are too short. Their miniskirt is terrible. You can see almost everything. And those hippie girls don't wear what they should. Sometimes not even shoes. His mother had an opinion about everything, even things she didn't know much about. It made arguing with her impossible. One of her favorite expressions was, I know everything. Father was less opinionated, but not much. Being survivors of the Holocaust gave them the right to be right about everything. And because of this, Tommy always felt guilty arguing with them. So he didn't. Until recently, there hadn't been much to argue about. Now he was hiding more and more. He didn't feel good about it, but he liked what he was doing. He certainly wasn't going to tell them about smoking marijuana or about liking Marianne. He wasn't even sure if she liked him in the same way, though after the last call, maybe. And what's this about free love anyway? It's disgusting. And, but, sorry, I missed the line. It's about, no, sorry. And what's this about free love anyway? It's disgusting. It's about loving the person you want to love. That's all. Their race or religion shouldn't matter. You can say that all you want, but I know it's not true, his mother said. If you marry a shiksa, you get into a fight, the first thing she'll call you is a dirty Jew. Who's talking about marriage? Thank God. And you can't be like them. They won't let you know. They won't let you, I know. How do you know? Before the war, many Jews tried to assimilate in Hungary, especially the educated ones from Budapest. They said that everybody's a Hungarian. They said it didn't matter if you were a Christian or a Jew, you were still a Hungarian. But those rotten arrow cross fascists didn't think so. Those free love Jews still ended up wearing the yellow star. Many tried to convert. Even my father converted to keep us from being taken away. And they still took us. So don't tell me about this, everybody is the same craziness. But this is Canada. It's the same everywhere. Believe me, I know. Yeah, so that's part of the cultural complications. Now, the story goes on to page 53. I don't know, I don't have, oh, it's 11:56. I'm running late. Oh no, what time is it? How much time do I have left?
It's up to you. I mean, it's fascinating to hear you read and telling your stories. So just take your time.
Okay. Just tell me how much time I have left before the people have to go to another class if they have to.
I don't know if anybody has any more classes. Well, you at least have half an hour.
Okay, good, because I sometimes get lost and I'm shuffling books trying to find out. Okay, I will read a couple more short sections that might give you a bit of a clue about the novel and also the complexity of Tommy's world. Okay, page 120. Tommy, there's a Hungarian bookstore in the novel, and the person who runs it is a Hungarian, obviously, and Tommy goes in there to get magazines and books for his parents, but this man is also a very educated man, unlike most of the Hungarians who escaped in '56, who were that Tommy's parents know. And he also has a special interest in Tommy. And he's also the reporter for the Hungarian sports magazine, both in Hungary and here in Canada. So he writes about Tommy and he takes this interest in Tommy and educating him about being and he questions him about who he is. So begins at the bookstore. What kind of a Hungarian are you? Tommy was caught off guard by Mr. Pupp's question. He had come by the bookstore to pick up his father's newspaper and his mother's magazine. The story, the only Hungarian bookstore, that's the name of the bookstore, the story, a Mese. The only Hungarian bookstore in Montreal was kitty corner from his aunt's restaurant on Prince Arthur Street, near the Main. The one block was called Little Pest by the Hungarian immigrants in the neighborhood. Many single men who lived and worked in the area frequented his aunt's restaurant and congregated in Mr. Pupp's bookstore because they were hungry for home-cooked meals and homesick for news, serious discussions of soccer and politics. They wanted respite from their immigrant world and the comfort of the old familiar one. What do you mean, Mr. Pop? He asked. You're Hungarian, aren't you? I was born there, but I grew up here. That doesn't matter. You are a Hungarian. What do you know about Hungary, of its history, art, music, literature? Tommy scanned the books and records on the shelves. Not much, just what my parents tell me. I don't read Hungarian. It's a shame. Hungarian's history is important. You should know your motherland stories. Tommy never heard his parents refer to Hungary as their motherland. They spoke longingly of family, but not of country. Usually the country was remembered with bitterness and anger. He didn't understand what Mr. Pop was getting at. He'd always thought his formality in speech and dress strange. I remember reading the Palucai Fiúk when I was very young and liking it very much. Yes, that's a wonderful and important novel. I have a copy of it, Mr. Pop said and walked off to get it. I can't read Hungarian anymore, said Tommy. But by that time, Mr. Pop was back with the book. Here you are. Tommy didn't want to spend any money on a book he wasn't going to read, though now he felt obliged to buy it. He reached for his wallet. It's a gift. I can't. I insist. Thank you, he said with hesitation. It's important to know your country's history, art, music, and literature, especially when you're going back as a representative of its diaspora. Diaspora? Tommy didn't know. Tommy didn't want to sound stupid, so he just nodded. Okay. Nope, that's it for now. Yeah, so there's he's beginning to understand that he's being asked to be more than just Canadian. He's more than just a Canadian immigrant. There's still that history of being a Hungarian that he's reminded of by Mr. Pop. And he begins to, at the beginning of the story, I mean, it's just a story of him trying to get to Hungary so he could play soccer. But now it's becoming more of a conscious act of what means going back. And I want to read another short section, and then I'm going to finish with one more, and then that's it. Okay, 267. He's back in Hungary. He's back in his town of Hajdú Békés with his cousin, who in the story was actually the goalie of the other team, the Hungarian University soccer champions, and they played together against each other. And the description in the novel of how that game becomes an important return to connecting with his cousin and his family. But that's a long section. Here's a short section about what it feels like for him. And I admit I felt this way too. When he went back to Hajdú Békés and was wandering around the streets of the town. Tommy wasn't used to being stared at. Everybody in Békés knew Gabi. He was a local hero, at least until the last game. Now he was the plague. People avoided him, but they were curious about Tommy. So they had to acknowledge Gabi. Tommy was an exotic animal. He was a stranger from Békés. 288. And Tommy stopped in front of the schoolyard. He saw his 7-year-old self there after being kicked out by Mrs. Gombas. Széles and his gang were standing around the bike rack smiling. The Széles is the bully. Tommy eyed each of them. They turned their gazes toward his bike, the beautiful bike his father had brought him in from Budapest, on which he had become a brave Hajdú riding to fight the terrible Turks. Its tires were slashed. The bright red enamel on the crossbar had been scraped away. The chain was off and coated with dirt, and the Superla logo was missing. You stupid animal, Tommy screamed, charging Széles. He took him by surprise, fought him to the ground. Tommy fought to stay on top. He punched Széles as hard as he could. Blood spurted from Széles's nose. Tommy hit him repeatedly. I won't cry, he shouted. Széles threw him off and rolled on top of him, pinning his arms and his legs. Selish's blood dripped onto Tommy's face. Selish hit him and spat on him. Jews, Jews, dirty Jews, 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 eat dirt, he taunted, stuffing a handful of dirt down Tommy's throat. Tommy twisted his head, but Selish had him by the hair. Jews eat dirt, dirty Jews eat dirt. Selish was howling. This is his remembrance of being beaten up by the bully. And for the final piece is actually at the end, Tommy's friend Beka had grown up to be a well-known Roma poet in the story. And he's asking Tommy to smuggle out his manuscript to get it published in Canada. And the section is the introduction to this manuscript that the Roma poet wrote, and it's an accusation. It's based on Émile Zola's J'accuse, which is a accusation against the injustices created against a minority. In Zola's, it's one particular person, but here it's about the Roma, and because part of the novel is dealing with the Roma question, and Tommy sees it also as part of him being affected by this. It reflects on his condition as well. So it's called J'accuse. I speak to you as an equal, something you don't accept or expect. I speak to you man to man, something you can't or don't want to face. I speak to you as a neighbor, countryman, and comrade. I speak to you this way because you need to be spoken to like this. I don't ask for your permission to do this. We will always be unlike you. Our sun-baked faces are the maps of where we are from, where we are, and where we are going. We will always be your freedom that you are afraid to take back from your overlord. I have lived in your shadows. I have lived as your game to be hunted, as your slave, as your servant. I live in your putris and mud shacks, half naked, fully hungry. I live drunk, puking and pissing in your cities, on your streets, in your alleys. I live begging on your streets and markets, reading your palms, telling your fortunes. I am ignorant because you need me to be ignorant, because you would deny me the power to think for myself. Because when I do, I will ask questions you don't want to hear, questions you don't want to answer. My questions question your authority and your legitimacy. They question your knowledge and wisdom. My question asks you to question yourself. My questions ask you to look in the mirror. I have looked in the mirror and see beneath my rags a history rich in knowledge, cunning, skills, traditions, songs, and stories. I see behind our beaten brow and tired eyes pride, joy, laughter, life. I see the begging child's palms, innocence. I see in our women's tears strength, beauty, and wisdom. We weren't born beggars, drunks, and thieves. By your swords, laws, and lies, you have made us these things. We are nomadic. We value what we can carry, our stories, our words, our ways, our songs, and truths. We own what we need. We are what you used to be before you gave up that life to become what you are today. We are people who have made you better. We value our freedom. You mistake that for irresponsibility, for being uncivilized. Our word is a spit and a handshake. That spit is our spirit, our bond. For us, the land is not to measure, fence, claim, or chop each other up for. The land is to travel on, to rest upon, to dream on, to feed off, to play upon, to be buried in. What have we stolen from you in comparison to what you have stolen from us? What have you given us compared to what we have given you? What have we done to you compared to what you have done to us? Look in the mirror. Excuse me. So that is almost the end of the novel. And Tommy then is flying back home to Canada with a new sense of where is home, what is home. And in the end, he decides, well, I'll let you maybe, if you want to read the novel to find out what that's about. So with that, I conclude my reading part, and I'd like to turn it over to your questions, and maybe I can elaborate and clarify some of the things I've talked about and read. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Endre, for this informative and inspiring talk. It was lovely to hear you read your poems and passages from your books. And I can see no questions in the chat box, but I hope that there are some questions that people want to ask. So all you have to do is unmute yourself. You are used to doing that, right? And feel free to ask any questions.
My experience is that when I went to Hungary and I was lecturing, I found that the students are very quiet, serious and quiet. And that's not what we're used to here in Canada. Everybody's, putting their hands up and objecting or whatever. And afterwards, I asked the teacher, is this normal? And they said, yeah, and I found out that you students are called hallgatók, listeners. So I said, oh, I wonder if that means that you're not supposed to speak and just listen because you're not ready yet in university to ask questions. But I used to tell my students, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So if you have anything, I'd be glad to discuss or talk to you about. If anything wasn't clear about what I wrote and said. No?
Yeah, because we also looked at your poem, O Canada. So I would also like to ask students whether they understood a bit more what you were saying there. Okay, Anna, I can see you nodding. So would you like to comment on it?
Not really on that one. I would like to ask another question, if that's all right.
Sure.
How much of Tommy's story is your story as well, and how much is just fantasy, I guess?
Fiction, yes. Well, the first book is very closely based on my experience. The first book deals with it's set during 3 months of the revolution. And I did live in a small town, Hajdúnánas. I did experience that being kicked out of school because I was Jewish. My parents did experience, and I experienced that nights when the mobs were walking the streets looking to beat people up. The blacksmiths did protect us from that. We did escape. We did try to escape. But there are sections in that story as well that I made up to flesh out the story, because my story, I knew it as a story, but writing a novel is something a bit more. It's like creating a universal theme. So I wanted, from my perspective of being an old person now, looking back, writing it, I could see events or create events that help to promote that theme of that loss of innocence, of coming of age. Now, the second book, Home Game, is much more fictional. I did go to university. I did play soccer. And I did have all these immigrant kids playing with me. We were all there. But the story of, and I have gone back to Hungary, but what happens there is made up. It's fictional, although it's based on characters I met when I was back there. The Roma character, I actually did have a playmate in Hungary, and when I was young, Béka. Nobody knew his other name, but then when I went back, I said, okay, well, the character is now 19. I wonder what he's like, and I never met him again. But I did strike up a friendship over the years with a famous Hungarian poet, a Roma poet, Károly Bari. I don't know if you've heard of him, or Bari Károly. He won the Kossuth Prize, so he's well known, but he's gone quiet over the years. So I took part of what I knew about him and I made Baker grow into becoming a poet. So I built that. And I think most writers of this kind of fiction use their own history, but flesh out and lie to make it more interesting. So that's it. The thing about the poem "O Canada," just to tell you, it's a poem that is filled with all kinds of references to Canadian culture, both popular, political, and other, French, English. So I know it might be a very difficult book. You can do a PhD on that, I think, to all the elements. But if you have anything particular in that poem that you didn't understand, let me know, because sometimes playing with language, this is part of translation. Like I say in one part of it that the conservatives don't like our queens. When I go into the queen, and the queen is a reference to homosexuality. So the conservatives the other people don't like the queen for different reasons, but the conservatives, and it's a reference because there was an issue about Canada now has homosexuality is legalized. You don't break any laws by being who you are. So that was things like that. Excuse me. Yes, anything else I can answer?
Okay, I don't know, Camilla, do you have a question?
Well, I'm actually right now in Hajdúböszörmény, and I know some of the, Hajdúböszörmény's history has many Jew families, and I'm wondering if you came back to Hajdúnánas, and is there any communities, Jewish communities left there, or they just flew when you did?
Well, I've been back a few times. The first couple of times in the 60s, in the early 70s, my relatives were there. An aunt and my two cousins that I grew up with. But everybody else has pretty well gone away. When I went back the last time, I went back and there were no Jews left, only the cemetery in the cemetery. And it's a different town, but I did each time I've gone back, because when I go back, I go to the cemetery to pay my respects to my father's father and family. I go through a very strange love-hate response to the place. There's something in me that still knows I'm from Hajdúnánas, but part of me knows that I was forced to leave my homeland. And there's that anger and that fear of that child that still comes up at times, even though I know the people living there now are not the people who were there then, And it's a very strange experience of being not an immigrant. An immigrant is someone who leaves a country because they want to. I was an exile. I was forced to leave. So in some ways, my book Serbus was, when I went back and first time, you're from that area, right? So Serbus is how you say it. I was told it's Servus, but in Hajdúnánas, I always heard it as Serbus. Is that it? Oh, good. Okay. So
we say Servus, right?
Yeah. Okay, good. So it means both hello and goodbye. You use it both ways. And so I wasn't allowed to say goodbye in my own way when I left Hungary. So when I went back and I experienced what I experienced there, I was feeling that I will say goodbye on my terms now. And so I wrote the poems. Serbus is a goodbye poem. And I thought, I was done with it. Now I can live on being a Canadian. But 60 years later, or 66 years later, I'm still working out, home, where is home, what is home? So, that I still occasionally go back and try to say Serbus, but it means hello and goodbye now, But I know that for a while in Hungarian history, people had told me that no, there was no anti-Semitism in Hungary during the 56. But now I wrote it, and some people who saw the first drafts of Never Again said, no, that's not true. And recently, about 2 years ago, I saw there was a book that came out talking exactly about Hajdúnánash, about that, and has been kept out of history books. Yeah. So in some ways, I feel it's more important for me to read these books and talk to the Hungarians than to Canadians, because I'm still trying to connect with Hungary that way. I'm hungry for Hungary.
Thank you, Endre. Well, we still have some time if others feel like joining in the conversation. Take the opportunity. We also have two Esthers here. I'm asking you if, and everybody else, of course, if you have questions.
If I may, then I will ask a few.
Sure.
So there's a lot to unpack in the poem we've been given to and you have read, the OOO Canada. And I want to ask about the ABC, NBC, PB, I don't know, that part.
Yeah.
Because I found parts of it funny, parts of it satirical, and I want to ask about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the things you should know about Canada is that, let me give you an example. When the United States sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Okay. So we are very much, or were at that time especially, and still are to a large degree, under the influence of this big elephant next door to us. And they dominate our media landscape. And we are very much influenced. In fact, many Canadians, this has been one of the problems of Canadians, is that when you say, hey, there's a Canadian program on, and they say, oh, how boring. You know, like we don't think, or we didn't think Canadians could make good art. It's part of our colonial mentality that art is only where someone else makes it. We are colonial. Colonists don't make products. They produce raw material. So a lot of our artists go to the United States to make it. And therefore we get back a lot of the NBC, PBS. These are news stations in the United States. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. So part of it is that this kind of friendly brainwashing goes on. And we need, I'm always for a Canadian perspective, although I'm obsessed by American television too. You know, I'm not exempt from that. So I was trying to get that across, that we pay more attention to what the Americans say. And if they ever mention Canada, it's in the news that the Americans said this about Canada. Big deal. You know, we should be looking at ourselves. And in a way, Tommy is a character who has to go through that as well to understand, what does it mean to be a Canadian? What does it mean to be a real Canadian? And at the end of the novel, he decides to go on a trip to discover that. That's not part of the journey here, but that's another part. So that's the reason I put in those American references, and then satirize at the end. Each province contributes a weapon to overcome this empire. And satirically, like lobsters from Prince Edward Island, fiddlehead from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. These are vegetables. So we're going to attack the Americans with lobsters, or we're going to attack them with fiddleheads, or we will send them our music, you know, anyway. So that's part of the satire.
Thank you. I understand now. And one other thing, if I may, you've mentioned that the second book's name is Home Game, and
Yes.
you've translated it in Hungarian to Otthoni játék. But you probably know this, but actually You have visitors, and in Hungarian, vendég. You have home, and in Hungarian, they are called hazai. So that's another aspect, because otthon and haza mean have different connotations in Hungarian, I think. And that doesn't really translate to English in that sense, but that's another addition that could be, you know, interesting. So like home game could be hazai játék or hazai pálya.
Hazai pálya, the hazai meccs, otthoni meccs, az olyasmi? Yeah, okay. I tried to think if I forgot to ask my friends in Hungary about this, because I had about 5 other titles, and finally my publisher said, "What's the title?" And I came up with that. And then I thought about, at that point, I was only thinking the 2, you know, going home, Canada, Hungary. Only after did it, you know, this tells you something about writers themselves. They don't always say what they don't always know what they mean. Sometimes a meaning comes in after, you know, a realization. So home game to me as a match came in later than the title came. We lost her, something happened.
I guess that is still with us somewhere.
Oh, okay, yeah. So anyway, the students used to ask me when I taught, did the writer mean all these things that that we have to take apart in our class? And my response was that not always, because sometimes time and distance gives us the reader's perspective. So it's the reader that completes the book in some ways, you know. But a lot of times, yes, they do, because they think about what they write. They don't just write it down, you know. They go back over and over again. So for me, picking the name of the team, of the soccer team for the boys, the Sir George Knights, it was the actual name of the team in the university. But then I realized it's a quest. Knights go on quests. They go on journeys for the Holy Grail. So then I said, oh, okay, good choice, you know. So therefore, I choose that. I also try to choose, not everyone, but like the bookstore owner, Mr. Pup, he always pontificates like a priest, like a pope. You know, he always talks like that. The bully, Selesh, I chose that name because I understood it as full of wind, but the wind that can hurt you, but you can also try to deal with that wind, you know, which Tommy has to. I'm trying to think of others, but yeah, I don't know if that my choice for my teacher's name is the best, but Mrs. Gombash, the mushroom, that there's a darkness and grows in the dark. It's beautiful, but it grows in the dark. And she at the beginning, Tommy was her pet because he knew his ABC. He could recite the poem without a mistake. But once the revolution turned, she turned also. And she's the one who kicked him out of class for being a Jew. Yeah. So name choosing was interesting, an exercise for me in the book. But anyway, any other questions?
Well, I would like to ask you if you believe that immigrants, especially who are forced to leave their countries, will they ever be able to find a new home other than their own?
Well, as I said at the beginning, you know, that this Syrian woman who has been here 10 years, she said, this is my home, no question. You know, she left a war-torn country, her family is still there, whatever. She's come to that realization. Some people take shorter time, some people like me might take forever, but usually it's in the second or third generations that people begin to think of themselves as like Canadian or whatever country they went to. And it's, in a sense, Margaret Atwood at one point said, once you've planted parent into the ground. Once you buried them, that's the country you're in. That's your home. So that's one explanation. The other interesting thing about now, I think it's different now than before, and especially in Canada, that people are now proud of where they come from. So they refer to themselves as, let's say, Syrian Canadian, Hungarian Canadian, Greek Canadian. And that's been part of the Canadian emphasis since the 60s, the multicultural, right? So you don't want to deny the other person's origins, but you want them to connect with this. And apparently there's been problems with that, and people have been debating that. In the United States, they had what's called a melting pot mentality, which means that you want to become American as quickly as possible, you know. But now it's changing. People are now more and more proud of their roots. They don't feel second class or inferior just because they're new to a place. And that causes problems now, as you can see. So ultimately, what I say is that for me as a writer, the only home is the imagination. So that's where I feel most, not comfortable, because the imagination can give you trouble, but it's more most at home, you know. So are you from Hungary?
No, I'm Syrian.
Syrian. Oh, marhaba.
Marhaba. And I really enjoyed reading your short poems, and that's why whenever I read diaspora literature, I feel touched, because, you know, we have our own crisis as well, and immigrants. So I just wanted to ask you about this, but as you said, it's like individual experience. If they can cope or not, they feel it's another home, or they always feel homesick.
But you know, this is the difference, and I hope I don't insult too many people. The difference between Canada and the Hungary. I was back in for the 60th celebration of the Hungarian Revolution. I wanted to go back when the book came out, and I met somebody in Debrecen, a flower seller, who, when they heard me talk Hungarian, they realized my Hungarian was that I wasn't from Hungary anymore. And they began to talk to me about immigrants. And they brought up the Syrian refugees coming. And they said, you know, those Syrians come over and they take our jobs. You know, they say that. And then in the same sentence, he says, and they don't work. You know, so, and I looked at him, I said, okay, my Hungarian's not that good, but I understand this. But I said, how do you explain that? He says, well, they're lazy and they take our jobs. That's all he could say to me. So what I understood later, talking to Hungarian friends who understood more, he says, no, that's part of the political message that's coming down. It's not the individuals. I mean, it combines with that. But in Canada, we are very much working not to have the political message come that you're an immigrant, what are you doing? You're taking our jobs. And that I think is the difference. Hungary still has to deal with psychologically accepting that it's not a singular cultural world. Oops, I seem to turn people off. Okay.
No,
anyways,
no, I'm so sorry. I'm still here, but
okay.
Wrong button.
Okay, but anyway, so that I think is, I don't know, you might have had that experience of experiencing being an immigrant in Hungary. What is that like? I'm asking a question if you can talk about that.
Well, I don't know if I can be considered as an immigrant here. I'm here for studying, but of course, Syrian immigrants has been all over the world. And sure, they find some places more welcoming for Syrians, some others not. So I really don't know, but in here, I don't think that I can answer your question, since I am treated as just like a
Everybody else.
Student here, yeah, like scholarship holder, but I don't know about immigration. But as far as I know, that there are no immigrants here, like no refugees, let's say, here in Hungary.
Not in number. And it's this is a point, when you get to university level, there's a much more accepting and open community. And that's exactly what Tommy is experiencing in the novel, that he's playing soccer with people from all over the world. And they call themselves the Sir Internationals, just as they're amongst themselves. The teams that they play in the ethnic league is made up mainly of Spaniards or Germans or Greeks, and therefore there's a kind of ethnic feel to it, whereas Tom is now, and most of those people have not had the educational opportunities to be exposed to those people with different ideas. And I mean, a lot of this in the novel centers around food experiences, how he's experiencing foods from other people as a way of getting to know them, And my partner, who's staring off here, she's Lebanese background. So here, we often have Lebanese food. We have Pete, what else?
Hummus, tabbouleh.
Hummus, tabbouleh, baklava to go along
they
with
are really tasty.
along with rantuchirke, goulash, and then we order pizza, So in some ways, Canada, sometimes I refer to Canada as goulash. It's made up of all these ingredients that really give it flavor. Anyway, so that's part of, the novel's experiences on very different levels of the complexity of being from here. Yeah. Shukran for the question.
Shukran كتير.
That's thank you in Arabic. Well, anyway, so any other questions in any other language? Mashni Elvin Besilni?
Well, then I wrote in the chat, but I don't know if anyone seen that, but I would like to ask a question. I'm curious about one of your writings from the beginning. It was your book titled Servus, and your name was written like Andre and not as Endre, and you promised us that you will tell us later why was it that, and I'm really curious, so I wanted to ask.
I'm glad somebody has a memory. Yeah. Yes, that's an interesting story in the sense it's not unusual. Well, when we arrived, we escaped in 1956. We lived under the communist rule, socialist dictatorship, right? And one of the things when you live under such a rule is you never question authority. It's dangerous. So when we escaped and we finally made it to Canada and arrived at the immigration center in Nova Scotia, there are these immigrant guards in their uniforms sitting there, and here we are. We don't speak anything like English, Mayaru. So the guy asked my mother, the immigration officer asked my mother, her name, Eva. Okay, Shandor. So he wrote down Alex. And then he said, son, and he said, Endre. And says, okay, Andre, and so I became Andre. And my parents they told me afterwards, we would never question the guard. Whatever he wrote was right. So I lived with Andre for many years. I became Andre in Canada. And then when I started, people kept asking me, are you French? And kept talking, when they heard my name, they started talking to me in French. And as I wrote either in the intro or in the book, that when I was an immigrant, in Canadian education system didn't think that a young boy could learn more than one language at a time. So I was only learning English. The French I started in high school, and the high school, as I wrote in the book, the French teacher from France said, if you can't speak proper French, shut up. So all immigrant kids shut up. And I was Andre, but they kept thinking I was Andre and the French teacher would keep talking to me. And I would go like that. And he said, are you stupid? So finally, when I started to publish, after a couple of books with Andre, and people kept thinking I was a French poet, and getting upset when I started reading English. Then finally I said, okay, enough of this. I want my name back. And so I claimed it. And it was a kind of a traumatic moment and a relief. And my friends still go back and forth who've known me for a long time. Endre, and you know, Endresh, you know, they murder it. But this is not unusual for people whose names are very different, or at that time. Now people are proud to keep their names and insist on keeping their names, which makes it very complicated when you're talking to people and trying not to mispronounce their name. Yeah. So that's sort of the story and the connection to who am I.
Thank you so much. It makes sense.
Thank you. It's a long journey to become who you are, especially if you're a writer, an artist who is always exploring these things, so when you think you got it figured out, that's when something else hits you. Anything else? Any other questions?
Well, if there are no more questions, Endre, I would like to thank you very much for this wonderful afternoon here that you spent with us. It's been a pleasure having you here, and let's just give you applause. And I'm very much hoping that when the pandemic is over, you will be able to visit us, and we can still meet you here. You can come home again.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to a good espresso and dobosh. I love that dobosh torta. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for listening and your questions. Have a good day. Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.